Are we ready to bring the jury in?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Let's bring them in. Please be seated. Shelley.
Ready.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. During the overnight recess, did any of you have any discussions with each other or with anybody else about the case? No hands are being raised. Please raise your hand if your answer is yes to any of these questions. Did any of you read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case? No hands are being raised. Did any of you use an electronic device to get on the Internet to do any independent research about the case? People, places, things, terminology. No hands are being raised. And finally, did any of you read or create any emails, text messages, Twitters, tweets, blogs, or social networking pages about the case? No hands are being raised. Thank you. I'm going to have the court reporter read back a question and answer from yesterday afternoon and give you an instruction on that. Shelley, you may do so.
The question was, so if we were to take pathological liar off the table as a possibility, just for the purpose of this next question, you think he was telling the truth? Answer, yes.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my instruction to you is that that is an improper comment by a witness as to the truth and veracity of another witness, and you are to disregard the question and the answer. Thank you very much. Mr. O'Mara, you may proceed.
Good morning, officer. How are you?
Good morning, sir. Fine, thank you.
When we were talking yesterday before break, we were talking about we agreed to use the term challenge interview, correct?
Yes, sir.
And we were talking about the context of that challenge interview, right?
Yes, sir.
Some of what you challenged him with in the context of that interview. I want to back up a little bit. I mentioned yesterday as an example that one technique that law enforcement officers are trained to use is what I call a command voice. And of course, you're familiar with that, right?
Yes, sir.
That's when you basically have to take control of a situation and you say it in a stern voice, almost a yelling voice, because what you want to do is let everyone know you're the person in charge, correct?
Yes, sir.
In that context, you're not actually yelling at the person like you're angry with them, are you?
No.
It's a technique to gain control of the situation, correct?
Yes, sir.
Similar in the challenge interview, it's not as though in this context you're actually angry with Mr. Zimmerman, correct?
No, anger's not a part of it. No.
Right. It's just a technique or a tactic that you use to try and undermine his confidence in his own story so that you can see if he breaks, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's the purpose of it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that when you challenge him, in an example, you said to him, you sound kind of frustrated on the phone conversation. Because everyone's going to hear these things, you know. What was your purpose in that?
On which phone conversation? On which phone conversation?
I presume, having read the entirety of your interview, that you're talking about how he sounded on the non-emergency call.
Okay.
And was that in an attempt to sort of, again, undermine his confidence in himself so that you might get some movement in his story?
Not necessarily. I mean, it could have been. I'm not quite certain my comment might have been or what tone I might have used.
Okay. Would you then defer for the jury's consideration to the way you present to yourself in the challenge interview rather than just me going over or repeating it in sort of bare words?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
But you agree that your purpose was to challenge Mr. Zimmerman?
It could have been, yes, sir.
And to try and undermine his confidence in himself such that he might tell you more or change his story in some way which would then give you an opening, correct?
I would classify it more trying to extract truth if he's hiding it, yes, sir.
Sure. And did you extract any truth or anything, any change in his story through this technique?
No, sir, I did not.
He was, in fact, consistent throughout, correct?
Yes, he was.
And he was also consistent with both all of his prior statements, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. As the chief investigating officer, you had availability of those prior statements, correct?
Yes.
And there were some changes. I think you said yesterday there were certainly some expansions and even some minor inconsistencies, right?
Yeah, there was some variations of accounts.
But nothing that you considered significant.
Nothing major, no.
Nothing that evidenced to you that he was lying to you?
Objection, Your Honor. It's an improper argument.
Sustained.
Any inconsistencies that you consider to be significant?
None which I can challenge him with, so I would say none.
With some help, hopefully this will work, I'm going to play with you a portion of the tape that you heard yesterday. I understand that I'm going to play it. If you can't hear it, I'll play it a second time. I believe this is a part to focus you on the investigation where you are playing for Mr. Zimmerman the 911 call, which has the screams in the background, to put it in context. And I'm going to try and get the volume correct, Your Honor, so I may need a couple of tries. Oh, I'm sorry. It is 182. It is the...
Okay, and is it a male or female? It's a male. And you don't know why? I don't know why I'm yelling help, but I don't...
Did you hear Mr. Zimmerman?
I'd have to hear it again.
Sure. I'm going to keep it low, Your Honor, until we get back to that point.
But now we're here working for you here, okay? No, that's where you got to open your mind, okay? And if there's anything that needs to be changed...
Your Honor, I'd ask that it be played at
I'm
the
sorry.
same level so that the jury can establish a
I
context.
think he's just trying to...
I can't do this anymore, okay? Let's do this one.
911, do you need police, fire, medical? Maybe
You hear that voice in the background?
both, I'm not sure, there's just one scope. 911, do you need police, fire, medical? Maybe both, I'm not sure, there's
That's
just
you.
one screaming out.
In the transcript, and I think it was pointed out on 2 occasions by Mr. De Leonda yesterday that there was a suggestion that Mrs. Zimmerman said, doesn't even sound like me. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Now, is it your opinion? Well, your opinion. Did you interpret that Mrs. Zimmerman was denying that it was him, or just that it simply didn't sound like him?
Your Honor, I'm going to object as to having this witness testify about what the defendant was thinking based on what he said.
Okay, sustained.
Did that change the direction of your interrogation of him, that statement that he said, doesn't even sound like me? Did that change the direction of your interrogation of him at all?
No, it did not.
Did that cause you any concern whatsoever?
No, it did not.
If I might just have a moment, Your Honor. I want to make sure that I get the right portion of the tape. And I think I might need to just play it a moment more. So I'm going to do that now, and it may be on that portion.
Good. And what's the address that they're near? 1211 Twin Trees Lane. Twin Trees Lane? Is this in the Twin Lake Town in Sanford? Yes. Okay. And is it a male or female? It's a male. And you don't know why? I don't know why I'm yelling help, but I don't know. Send someone quick, please stop. Okay. Does he look hurt to you?
Did you hear it then, in the background?
What he said?
Yeah. Nonetheless, you heard it that night, correct?
Yes.
And you heard his words being, does it even sound like me?
Yes.
That didn't change what you did as far as the investigation?
No, it did not.
Similarly, in the challenge interrogation, you even told him that you were moving from the interrogation room to another area out by your desk as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
That was both to listen to the tape, correct? But to also change the setting for him?
No, exclusively because of the facility. I didn't have I didn't have a computer inside the interrogation room.
Now, you said in response to a question from Mr. DeLeonte yesterday that you perceived Mr. Zimmerman's injuries to be minor, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was as you looked at him that night after midnight, correct?
Yes, sir.
And we showed you the picture of his injuries before he was cleaned up, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did he need to have any injuries at all for you to look into the investigation concerning both the crime and any possible defenses?
No, sir.
That's not an element, is it?
No. As far as him having injuries, no.
And you saw him on the 27th after midnight, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then he went to work the next day and then saw you for the 27th in the afternoon for the recreation video, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then he came back to talk with you again voluntarily on the 29th, correct?
That's correct.
And did you talk to him after that?
Yes, we had conversations.
And that was over the phone?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to him again in person?
Not that I can recall.
When you spoke to him on the phone, that was in order to, again, sort of forward your investigation of both the crime and any defenses to it, correct?
I believe he contacted me, but yes, the ultimate goal would have been to forward the investigation.
And in all of his communications with you, even after the 29th, he was cooperative?
Yes, he was.
Answered whatever questions you had for him?
Yes, he did.
Presented himself to do whatever it is that you wanted him to do?
Yes, he did.
You have done even more than just take the interviews of my client as part of your investigation in this case, correct?
Yes, sir. From other aspects of the investigation, yes.
You met with other witnesses?
Yes.
You met with Tracy Barton, correct?
Yes, I did.
At your office?
Yes, there at his residence also, or at the residence in Twin Retreat View. Yes.
Why did you meet with him at your office?
Object is beyond the scope of direct and calls for hearsay too.
Well, actually,
Okay, let me take one at a time. It was not covered in direct. It's not hearsay, the question and the answer that it would elicit. I have to sustain on wasn't covered in...
may I respond?
Yes, you may.
I would just allow a little bit of leeway for the chief investigating officer in the case to ask him what else that he has done in doing exactly his duties.
Well, you could do that in your case.
So I will call him as my witness?
If you choose to do so.
Then I will do that. Thank you, Your Honor. And I need to get this back to the clerk. If I can just have a minute. Are you going to use it?
Not right now.
Redirect it.
I actually do know how to use a laptop on occasion. Thank you very much.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
I'm not going to ask you to the opinion of anybody or to guilt or innocence. You understand that's improper, and I can't ask you that.
Yes, sir.
My question is...
Let me object, Your Honor, as to that non-question of this witness. Nothing but a comment on your previous ruling, which is inappropriate.
Okay, sustained.
My question is, Mr. O'Mara, on behalf of the defense counsel, asked you some questions about anger and disdain. Do you remember that, about ill will, hatred, all that stuff?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember him asking you a series of questions regarding that?
To somewhat, yes, sir.
Okay. Specifically asked you about your interview with the defendant, that you had reviewed it, and also Investigator Singleton's interview, and whether you found any evidence of hatred, spite, anger, disdain, ill will. Do you recall a series of questions regarding that?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay. I want to play something for you, sir, if I can figure out how to do this.
Just use this drop down.
Okay. I post them all there. Oh, okay. Our first play from you from the non-emergency call that defendant made.
Okay. These assholes, they always get away.
Is that something you would use in reference to somebody that you're going to invite over for dinner? Would you call them these assholes?
No, sir, I would not.
Does that seem like to you like a friendly comment about somebody else?
No, sir, it's not.
Okay, how do I do it again now? I got to hit that.
Yeah, look straight in. Don't turn and make a left. Shit, he's running.
He's running? Which way is he running?
Down towards the other entrance of the neighborhood.
Okay. Which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Did you hear that last comment the defendant stated, and pardon my language, these fucking punks?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is the word, pardon my language again, fucking punks, something that you would refer to, something good about people when you would reference them?
No, sir, it's not.
Are you saying, or you did testify when you were cross-examined, that those two, these assholes always get away, and pardon my language again, these fucking punks, that he said that because he wanted to interact and meet and invite Trayvon Martin for dinner that night?
Excuse me, Your Honor. That would be speculation.
Are you saying that those words were uttered by the defendant in reference to wanting to meet the victim?
Excuse me, Your Honor. That would be speculation.
I'll be glad to rephrase it. Does that not indicate ill will, hatred, and spite against somebody else, sir?
No, it does not.
In your opinion, calling somebody, reference them as, pardon my language, fucking punks?
That is ill will and spite.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
All right, sir, what is your name?
Sir, you were asked by Mr. Romero on behalf of the defendant in terms of whether there was evidence that he had followed him or not. Do you recall being asked that?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall you, in fact, to use Mr. Romero's words, challenged the defendant regarding that? Do you
Yes,
recall
sir.
that?
Yes.
About whether the defendant was following him or not? You
Yes, I
recall
did.
that? Did you hear the word there by the non-emergency operator about whether he was following him or not?
Yes.
And did the operator not tell the defendant not to do that?
In so many words, yes.
Okay. In your interviews and review of Investigator Singleton's interviews,
Would you mind taking that off the screen?
sure. Sorry. In your interview and review of Singleton's interviews, did the defendant in your interviews of him too, did he ever say he was excited? You want me to rephrase it? I'll be glad to rephrase it. I apologize. In your interview and also your review of Investigator Singleton's interview of the defendant, which you've had an opportunity to do, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Romero asked you about those. And Did the defendant ever indicate that he was happy that there were burglaries being committed at Retreat at Twin Lakes?
No, he did not.
Did he ever say he was excited that his neighborhood was getting burglarized?
No, he did not.
In fact, didn't he say this, sir?
950. This is the correct one? So you live at 1950 Retreat View Circle. Okay. I'm just going to keep quiet, and you tell me the story. You tell me what happened tonight, okay?
Just tonight?
Yeah, or whatever led up to this. Anything you want to tell me about what happened and why it ended up, what it ended up to where this boy got shot. Okay.
The neighborhood has had a lot of crimes. My wife saw our neighbors get broken into and she got scared.
Are you talking about the residents or vehicles?
The residents.
Okay.
While it was occupied. So I decided to start a neighborhood watch program in my neighborhood.
Okay, what is the name of the neighborhood?
Retreat at Twin Lakes.
Now, Investigator Singleton asked the defendant what led up to this in terms of the shooting, correct?
Yes.
And that's how he replied, correct?
Yes, it is.
Neighborhood watch, okay.
With Wendy Dorval, Sergeant Hertz, and Officer Buchanan, and I'm the coordinator. And there's been a few times where I've seen a suspicious person in the neighborhood. We call the police, the non-emergency line, and these guys always get away.
Okay. What made them suspicious?
You recall hearing that in terms of Investigator Singleton asking him, the defendant, about what was going on, and he's stating, as he stated there, that they always get away?
Yes,
recall
sir.
that?
Yes.
Didn't he say that to the non-emergency operator also? But he used more colorful language, pardon my language. He used, these assholes always get away, correct?
Correct.
And those words were uttered within minutes of the actual shooting, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
I've called before, and the police had come out, but these guys know the neighborhood very well, and they would cut in between buildings and lose.
You're saying these guys? Who are these guys?
The people committing the burglaries.
So you've seen more than one person, like, looking suspicious and doing these burglaries?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Now, Investigator Singleton had him clarify when the defendant in that interview on the 26th stated these guys, he had him clarify or describe what he meant, correct?
Yes, sir.
And defendant said the people committing these burglaries, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then to the non-emergency operator earlier that evening, when he spotted Trayvon Martin, he made reference to, using more colorful language, pardon my language, these fucking punks, correct?
Correct, sir.
So when Mr. O'Mara asked you about profiling, isn't it accurate that he was profiling Trayvon Martin as a criminal? He assumed that he was a criminal that night?
The objection on that would call for speculation.
Sustained as to speculation.
Do you recall Mr. O'Mara asking you about whether he was profiling the defendant, Trayvon Martin?
Yes.
Okay. If somebody were to believe that another person is a criminal, could that be a form of profiling?
The objection on that would be either speculation or irrelevant.
Overruled.
If I were to believe that you're a criminal and I followed you and did something, wouldn't that be profiling you?
Then I would object based upon improper opinion testimony unless we're opening that door.
He can testify if he knows in his experience as a law enforcement officer.
As long as we're going to his opinions. Fine.
let me make sure it's clear. If I were to believe that somebody was committing a crime, could that not be profiling that person, believing?
Object, Your Honor, leading.
Overruled is deleted.
Do you understand my question, sir?
Yes, I do. It could be construed as such, yes. Construed as such, yes.
Your review of the evidence there, was there any indication that Trayvon Benjamin Martin, the young man, I think 20 days past, had just turned 17, was committing a crime that evening, sir?
No, sir.
Was there any evidence that that young man was armed?
No, sir.
You were asked by Mr. O'Mara several times, and I think he made reference to your last interview being a challenged interview, I think. I don't know if you completely agreed with him on that or just agreed to use his terminology for that. Did you agree that that was a challenging interview?
I wouldn't quite classify it as that. However, it could be viewed as a challenging interview based on his view of it.
Okay, his being Mr. O'Mara's?
Yes.
Okay. Let's assume for purposes, let's call it a challenge interview, but you know what I'm referencing to?
Exactly.
Your last interview with the defendant on February 29th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. O'Mara asked you whether there was inconsistencies or not.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I want to play certain parts of you where I believe you at least questioned him about whether he had said something inaccurate before or said something different. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And I want to ask you about these, if I could.
Okay, just let me know if he does anything else. Yeah, we got him on the line. Just let me know if this guy does anything else. Okay. Always get away.
That statement. These assholes. What's behind that?
People that victimize me.
Can't you just tell us from there that a week earlier?
Do you recall you playing that recording for the defendant and asking him about that? Now, that somebody may refer that to a challenge, but do you recall questioning him about that?
Yes, sir. I pointed it out to him.
Okay. And he made reference to, when he made reference to, pardon my language, these assholes as people who commit crimes, correct?
Yes, sir.
All of them, and I wasn't following him. I was just pointing him in the same direction he was.
That's following.
Well, I thought
Okay. So you basically wrote it off. I mean,
right, and I was on the other side.
Now, you were questioning him, pointing out an inconsistency, weren't you not, that the defendant was claiming he was not following him, and you're telling him, that's following him, correct? You recall saying that?
Yes, sir.
Is also this. Ocean's running, and I'm getting out of my car in an instant to make sure I don't lose sight of this guy. That's what it sounds like. Are you following him? Because that's what it sounds like you're doing. That's why he asked you the question. It sounded to the dispatcher likely that you were running, and that's why he asked you that question. Are you following him? And your answer is yes. Okay? But then you get to the other side, and you're concerned about walking past this guy when you've already been chasing him, essentially. And he's telling you to go back to your car, and now you want to pretend, or not pretend, you want us to believe that you're concerned about having a flashlight to move back where you just ran?
you're looking for
Catch up
him.
to him. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, it sounds like you're looking for him.
Do you recall you and Investigator Singleton questioning him about that?
Yes, sir.
About there possibly being an inconsistency based on what he's saying and what the evidence showed?
An inconsistency as far as his acts and his words,
Yes, sir.
to clarify.
Right. And by the way, while we're at this point, Mr. O'Mara asked you about videotaping. You recall that you had questioned the defendant about videotaping, and you showed him the victim's camera that was at the scene near where his body was. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
And you stated, I believe, in direct and in cross-examination that you were bluffing him. You were telling him that the victim had potentially videotaped the whole thing?
At that point, yes, it was a bluff.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you knew that not to be true, correct?
At that point, yes.
Okay, all right. And my point is, and the defendant made a comment like, I hope to God it was videotaped. You recall that?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. Now, Mr. O'Mara asked you about stores and other places that have videotapes out there.
Yes.
Correct? Mm-hmm. Now, the defendant, I believe you've already testified, was head of the neighborhood watch, correct?
Yes, sir.
And had lived in that neighborhood for a while, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So he would have been aware whether there was videotaping or not in any of those buildings, correct?
I would assume so, yes.
Okay. And I know you weren't there when it happened, but you would agree that the interaction between the defendant and the victim in this case, the defendant was aware of whether the victim, before he got shot, took out the video and videotaped the defendant, correct?
Judge,
would know that.
I would object. That would be speculation.
Sustained.
Was there any evidence that the victim, before he got shot, said, hold on, before you shoot me, let me take out my camera and take a picture of you as you're shooting me?
No, there was none.
Was there any evidence that the victim, as the defendant was following him, said, hold on, I'm going to take a photograph of you so there'll be a record before you shoot me that you're following me?
Object, Your Honor. That was asked and answered.
Overruled.
Was there any evidence that the victim, as the defendant was following him, said, hold on, stop right there, let me take a photograph of you or let me videotape you before you shoot me or before you're following me and then shoot me?
No, sir, no.
And so when Mr. O'Mara asked you about whether the defendant knew that or not, he would have known that, correct?
I would assume so, yes, sir.
So he basically knew you were bluffing, is what I'm getting at.
Objection.
Based on...
That would be speculation.
Sustained.
I'll be glad. Let me play another recording for you if I could, sir.
And you're concerned about having a flashlight to move back where you just ran?
You're
Trying
looking
to catch
for
up to him. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, it sounds like you're looking for him.
You brought a flashlight with you.
Yes, ma'am.
You wanted to be able to see him.
You want to catch him? You want to catch him back
It
then?
doesn't. That's
Fucking punk can't get away. Listen, we're outside that interrogation room, okay? We are in a whole different area right here, okay? This is where, you know what I mean?
You were questioning him about what he had said, about the evidence, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you were doing there?
Yes, sir.
Can you recall? At what point the suffocation happened? Prior to you shooting him, he was on you, correct? Okay. And you were able to reach into your holster? Okay. You shot him at point blank range. He was on top of you, right? Yes, sir. And although that young, nobody came out to help you, and I can't pinpoint where you were smothered. That's the problem I'm having. And nobody's saying they saw him smothering you. People were saying they saw you on top of you, but they didn't see about the smothering part. So...
when we're listening to the screaming, it doesn't sound like there's a hesitation in the screaming. It sounds like it's continuous. Some of people know, it's going to stop. But we don't hear it stop.
We don't hear.
You recall you and Investigator Singleton challenged, to use Mr. O'Mara's words, challenging him about whether he was being smothered or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you please? Your Honor. You recall watching on direct and then on cross-examination, I believe it was on direct, I apologize, it was, being asked questions about the videotaping, the reenactment.
Yes, sir.
That occurred on the 27th, you recall that, between the defendant, where you took him back out to the scene, Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You were present for that, is that correct?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And do you recall that at some point the defendant as he's walking, and he's walking the route where he claimed he went? Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you recall him at some point saying that he went to look for an address and there were no addresses to the left there because those were the back of the buildings? Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm going to try to key to this point specifically, but do you recall?
I think I told the operator that.
I'm sorry.
And they said, "Are you following?" For a street sign. Right. So I got out of my car and I started walking. Go ahead. I was still on the phone with non-emergency and I started walking. Okay. Down this way. And because I didn't see a street sign here, but I knew if I went straight through that's Retreat View Circle, and I could give him an address because he said, "Just give me the address of the house you're in front of." Okay. And there's no address because these are the back of the houses. So,
do you recall that testimony, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
Sir, do you recall?
I don't know an address. And again, they asked me where he went, what direction he went, and I said, I don't know. And then I thought to get out and look for a street.
Right there on that corner lived Miss Lauer. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
You get back in the photographs. I want to show you a photograph of the front of Miss Lauer's residence. Isn't there a numerical address right there in the front of her house?
Yes, there is.
Isn't her address 1211? Sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, how do I get back there? So, as the defendant, no, you can stay right there on that photograph. So, the defendant in that reenactment, when he's pointing at all the back of these houses where he's claiming he doesn't have an address, there's an address right there staring at him. Isn't that true, sir?
Yes, there is.
That would be leading. This is still redirect.
I'll be glad to rephrase the question. When a defendant turns and points on video to this side where he's saying there's no address because it's the back of the house, right to the right, what is there? Is there a house there with an address?
Yes, there is.
Let me go to the aerial exhibit. For the record, that was State's Exhibit 33. Just number 1. And let me show you State's Exhibit number 1. And I'm going to put a close-up of part of that. For the record, State's Exhibit number 1, a scenario photograph of the retreat of Twin Lakes, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as you pointed out when you used Mr. Romero's words, challenging the defendant in that interview, you pointed out there was only 3 actual streets in the whole neighborhood, correct?
Yes, sir.
And this street the defendant claims he did not know is Twin Tree Lane, which is the main entrance that you come in and out of that retreat of Twin Lakes. And right here, I'm pointing to is Miss Lauer's address, correct?
Yes, sir.
So the defendant, when in that interview, claims he did not know this street and didn't happen to see the address here, but specifically did not know this street, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. You recall also on cross-examination, defense counsel asking you about inconsistencies or consistencies, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall the defendant in the interview that he gave you and Investigator Singleton stating that after he had shot Trayvon Martin said, or something, put his hands up, correct? Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall that he then stated that Trayvon Martin somehow fell on the ground face first? Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall a defendant stating that he put his arms out, correct? Do you
Correct.
recall him saying that?
Yes, sir.
Now, sir, if I may approach the court. Do you recall, sir, that one of the first, in fact, the first person that actually came out before the officer was a person named Joe Manalo?
Yes, sir. Jonathan.
I'm sorry. Jonathan Manalo. I apologize. And may I approach the witness, Your Honor? Showing you State's Exhibit 77. Do you recall that he took some photographs out there?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And one of them was State's Exhibit 77?
Yes, sir.
And may I publish that to the jury, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
And you recall in that photograph the victim's hands being underneath his body?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Could someone say that that was inconsistent with the defendant's statements that his hands were straight out, that he had put his hands out?
That positioning, yes.
I'm sorry.
That positioning, as seen there, yes, it is.
In that interview that you conducted, or Investigator Singleton conducted, the defendant didn't say, I put his hands out, and then after I put his hands out, I put him back in, did he?
No, he did not.
I think in cross-examination, you were asked something about exaggeration. Do you recall being asked about that?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall, I think either you uttered it or Mr. O'Mara uttered it on behalf of the defendant, exaggeration. Do you recall what that was about?
Pertains to the defendant's statements.
You felt he was exaggerating certain parts of it?
Among other things.
Did you feel, I can't lead you, so
Okay.
Did you feel in terms of exaggeration, what did you mean when you said that he was exaggerating parts of his interview?
How I felt, okay, based on...
Okay, no, what I'm getting is inconsistent. I don't want to...
Okay.
You were asked specifically about exaggeration. Did you feel he had exaggerated the manner in which he was hit?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Regarding your interview with the defendant on February 29th, was your investigation still ongoing?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Had you, at that point, and even further, had you gotten any results back from FDLE regarding the analysis done of the clothing or anything else regarding that, sir?
No, sir, I had not.
Had you gotten the medical examiner's report or examination in terms of final findings regarding that?
No, sir, I had not.
Had you gotten any results regarding possible DNA?
No, sir.
Had you gotten any results in terms of the ballistics, the firearms, the trajectory, the stippling, whatever evidence regarding that?
No, sir.
Had you spoken to a girl or lady that was speaking to the victim on the phone at the time or right before the time that this murder happened?
No, sir.
Had you analyzed the phone records and the conversations between the victim, Trayvon Martin, and this lady that he was speaking to? Her name's Rachel Gentile.
No, sir.
Had you seen the 7-Eleven video?
No, sir, I had not.
You also did, obviously, reports in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in some of those reports, did you in some way write down some inconsistencies, what you felt were some inconsistencies based on the statements that the defendant had given you?
Concerns of mine about his statements, correct? Yes, sir.
Okay. You mentioned at some point or you were asked about the size of the individuals, correct? Mr. Martin and the defendant, correct?
The physical sizes?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the victim.
Yes.
And I think, did you describe, and I apologize if I got it wrong, did you describe the victim as a skinny kid or something to that effect?
Yes, sir, I did.
Would you classify the defendant, when you came into contact, as a skinny kid?
Would I classify the defendant as skinny?
Yeah, as a skinny kid?
No, sir.
Would it be fair to say the bottom line, sir, is that after February 29th and after a later date, the investigation was turned over to somebody else? Is that correct?
As of what date, sir?
After that interview, at a later date in March, the investigation was turned over to another agency?
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. O'Mara asked you about phone calls that you had, telephone conversations with the defendant. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was your intent to eventually, if you could, attempt to interview the defendant again and challenge him, I guess to use Mr. O'Mara's words?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
If I can have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Any recross?
Oh, yes, Your Honor. Let's now go through some of the areas that Mr. Delarianda talked about. Starting with, and again, I'm going to give a blanket apology for using some curse words, but when they exist in the case, they exist in the courtroom. So, Mr. Delarianda was wondering whether or not you would use the term assholes in inviting somebody over for dinner. I think he said probably not. However, would you agree that if you were talking to somebody about something that you've used the words assholes probably thousands of times in your life?
I have used it.
Okay.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just used as just a slang term. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
When Mr. Delarianda said those words to you, I think he said assholes, didn't he?
In that tone?
Yeah.
Approximately.
Did you hear my client say that word assholes on the tape? We can play it again.
I heard him say it.
Okay. He didn't say it with the screeching voice that Mr. Delarianda did he?
No, sir.
He just sort of said assholes, right?
Yes, sir.
Did that, the way he said it, not the way Mr. Delarianda just said it, let's put that aside for a minute and speak more importantly about the way my client said the word assholes. Did that give you any cause for concern as to the way he said it?
No, sir.
Didn't show any ill will or hatred or spite when he said these assholes always get away? Did it?
If I may, not towards the individual. It seemed like more of a generalization.
Sure. Right. And of course, he was generalizing a little bit, correct? Because you know from your investigation that he was a bit frustrated that his neighborhood was being assailed by burglars, right?
That's how I interpret it.
You knew that.
Yes.
You knew that, as a matter of fact, you investigated and found out that a person, Emmanuel Burgess, was arrested 2 weeks before this event, a young black male, for having burglarized several homes in the neighborhood, right?
Yes, sir.
Late teens, tall, thin, just been arrested, right?
Yes, sir.
Sentenced to 5 years in prison for having burglarized a bunch of homes both in Retreat View Circle and outside, but still in your jurisdiction, right?
I wasn't involved in that, but yes, sir.
But you found that out, and looking into everything that you were looking into to see what's going on in the neighborhood, you knew not only had Emmanuel Burgess been arrested 2 weeks before for burglarizing, but that there were a lot of other burglaries in that same neighborhood, right?
Yes, sir.
Were you concerned that he was concerned about that? Did that cause you any concern that somebody who involved themselves in protecting the community, being on neighborhood watch, would be concerned about a bunch of burglaries in the neighborhood?
Him being concerned, if I may, is one thing. As far as my personal feelings towards his actions the night of is a little bit different.
Sure, and we'll get to that in just a moment.
Okay.
But talking specifically to the issue of calling them, these assholes always get away. Were you concerned that he used the word assholes?
No, sir.
And you've used it yourself?
Yes, I have.
And not in a necessarily derogatory way, correct? Just as sort of a slang term?
It tends to be more towards derogatory, sir.
So ever for guys walking into the squad room, it's about dinner time, you go, okay, what are you assholes doing for dinner? Anything like that?
Personally, no.
Really?
Not that. I see what you're saying, but it could be viewed that way.
Okay. Just like when he used the word shit, right? Oh shit, he's running.
Yes, sir.
Any concern with that slang term?
No.
Don't suggest that that evidences any hatred or ill will on his behalf, do you?
As I interpret that, that was said with the infliction as a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
As if something was happening bad.
Right, because he was just running away, correct?
Yes.
And then let's talk about fucking punks. Were you here for John Guy's opening? Did you hear it?
No, sir.
Oh. When Mr. Zimmerman said the words fucking punks, did he say it in a screeching, loud, aggressive voice the way Mr. Delarianda just recounted it to you?
No, sir.
Do you know why Mr. Delarianda yelled it at you?
To stress a point, to emphasize.
Right. But you heard it on tape, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how was it said on tape?
This said as more as a matter of factly, as far as these assholes always get away. It's or fucking punks.
Right. Might show some frustration, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Frustration based upon the fact that other people in the neighborhood who have burglarized the place seem to get away on occasion, right?
Yes.
And in that sense, you said that there was no evidence that Trayvon Martin was doing anything wrong, correct?
None whatsoever.
You don't know that, though, correct?
No, I do not.
Right? You know that whatever he may have been planning to do just wasn't completed, correct?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. There was no evidence to suggest that at all.
Matter of fact, there was a type of a tool found in the area where Trayvon Martin may have been hiding, wasn't there?
Approximately 5-6 days after the investigation of the scene, yes.
When you went back and you looked in the bushes and you found, what was it?
It was a piece of an awning belonging to, I believe it was a piece of a window, piece of hardware, basically. It looked like a Slim Jim.
Slim Jim. And what's a Slim Jim?
Slim Jim's a device used to go ahead and jimmy locks on vehicles, primarily.
To break into a vehicle.
Yes, sir.
And that was found a few days after this event.
Yes, sir.
Not particularly tied to this event by you, but it was there, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
In the bushes just off of one of the residences, correct?
In the bushes behind Jonathan Manolo's residence.
So, would you suggest that the focus be on how Mr. Zimmerman stated the words fucking punks as opposed to the way Mr. Guy did in opening or Mr. Delarianda just did in your questioning?
Well, I can't speak for Mr. Guys, but Mr. Delarianda, it was different.
Okay. Now, he also asked you that you were questioning Mr. Zimmerman on the fact that he was following Trayvon Martin, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Zimmerman said?
Words along.
You said yes, right? You said, wait a minute, were you following him? And in the interview, his word was yes, right?
In one of the interviews, yes.
He acknowledged to you that he was following him at one point, correct?
Yes, sir.
Anything wrong with following somebody like that? Let me ask you this way, anything illegal? I'm sorry. I'll let him answer that one.
Repeat it, please.
Did you think that there was anything wrong with him following him to see where he was going?
Legally speaking, no.
Okay. Matter of fact, it was, and you heard the non-emergency call, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it was twice on that the non-emergency operator asked Mrs. Zimmerman, tell me if he does anything else.
Yes, I believe that was said.
Right?
Yes.
Does that indicate that he wants him to keep an eye on him?
Yes, sir.
And you said following him is not legally improper, correct?
That's not illegal. No,
Even
sir.
approaching somebody is not legally improper, is it?
That's open for interpretation.
Tell me what crime you believe would occur if I were to walk up to you on the street and say, hi.
In that manner, none whatsoever.
How about, what are you doing here?
None whatsoever.
How about, get the hell out of here?
None whatsoever.
How about, I don't like the way you're dressed. I don't like the fact that you have gray on. Get out of my face.
That could be construed as confrontational.
Sure, but is that
Not illegal.
crime?
No, sir.
And when this operator who said twice, tell me if he does anything else, then says, are you following him? What does Mrs. Zimmerman say?
He says yes.
And in your investigation, is there anything at all to suggest at that time that Mrs. Zimmerman continued to follow Mr. Martin?
At which point, sir?
At the point that the officer said, or the non-emergency operator said, we don't need you to do that, and Mrs. Zimmerman said, okay.
I would say yes, there was.
And what evidence would you have?
His end location.
Sorry?
His end location. The location where the incident ultimately ended.
Okay. So the fact that, may I approach the witness, Your Honor? For the indicated purposes of the witness, State Exhibit 139. Because you know the event started where?
The event, as far as I'm concerned, started off that map.
Okay. Talking about the physical altercation, I apologize. My understanding from, what's your understanding as to when Mr. Zimmerman got to this area, what path he took?
You understand?
Please do.
Could you face forward?
Yes. Okay. My understanding of the interpretation is he's coming this way. He walks. So I got a pointer. Okay. He walks for his statement all the way over here. He says he doesn't see him. Okay. And the altercation, physical altercation, started right there approximately.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So, with that as context, then, do you know exactly where Mr. Zimmerman was when the non-emergency operator said, we don't need you to do that?
Based on his statement, he was at his vehicle, which would have been, I believe, off of that or wherever he parked it.
Based on his statement, he was at his vehicle, which would have been, I believe,
Wherever he parked it on Twin Trees.
It's your understanding of the investigation that Mrs. Zimmerman was at his vehicle when the officer said, we don't need you to do that?
That was when he was exiting his vehicle. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay, and then how many seconds went forward as he was walking before that conversation occurred?
Objection.
I'd have to.
Facts, not an evidence, case of walking.
Sustained.
How many seconds? You heard the tape where you can hear him getting out of the car, correct?
Where I heard the sound of the door being opened, which I interpreted that.
That he got out of the car,
Yes.
right? And then you know that he was walking in some direction because he said to the officer in response to, are you following him? He said yes, right?
Objection is the facts, not an evidence. Walking, assuming a fact, not an
Rephrase
evidence.
your question.
You know that he was following him because he told the non-emergency operator that he was, right?
Yes, sir.
And you know from the conversation that Mr. Zimmerman indicated to the non-emergency operator that he had cut between the buildings, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I might approach again, so just so we're clear with what he just said. He parked his car somewhere in this area, correct?
Correct.
And then, go ahead.
Back around here somewhere.
Right.
So I'd have to hear it again, obviously.
Could you face forward?
Yeah, I'd have to hear it again, obviously, but somewhere very shortly thereafter leaving his car, that's when it was asked, are you following him?
Okay.
And he said yes.
And Mrs. Zimmerman indicated that Mr. Martin had gone between the buildings. He was out of sight, correct?
Yes.
Yet, you testified a moment ago that, pursuant to Mr. Zimmerman's statement, he had gone down to Retreat View Circle, correct?
Well, that was his statement, but as far as him having a visual on when he might have got out of the vehicle, I really don't know. I can't say. It wasn't there. But he could have seen him at any point which way he was running. Am I making myself clear? I mean,
well, the jury can decide that. I'll try and walk you through a little bit more. So my question a little while ago was whether or not you had any evidence to support any contention that Mr. Zimmerman continued to follow Trayvon Martin after being told not to. Do you have any evidence to support that?
I would answer, I have information, yes, that there was, just based on where we located Trayvon and the fact that the altercation happened after his conversation. That's my interpretation.
Let me ask it this way.
Let
me ask it this way. Do you have anything to contradict Mrs. Zimmerman's statement that he walked the rest of the way to Retreat View Circle and was coming back towards his car when the interaction, whatever it was, between Trayvon Martin and him occurred?
Nothing tangible, no.
Go intangible on us then. So what do you mean nothing tangible? What do you have?
And the circumstances and the totality of the whole thing that I'm looking at, as I interpreted it, when he says follow, walking behind, trying to find a direction, I construe that as follow. He was trying to do something in the same direction where Trayvon was going.
He was trying to see where he was.
As far as the word follow, as my report may indicate, I mean, it's, but it's open for interpretation.
And as your report indicates, there's nothing to suggest that Trayvon Martin went straight down Retreat View Circle, towards Retreat View Circle. He went between the buildings, correct?
According to statements made by Mr. Zimmerman. According to statements by your client, yeah.
And of course, all of those statements, including Mr. Zimmerman saying that he was attacked by Trayvon Martin coming from that area as well, correct?
Correct.
Anything to contradict that?
No, sir.
You understood from your conversation with Wendy Dorval, your knowledge of Neighborhood Watch, that if a crime is occurring, that you ought to call 911, correct?
I don't recall talking to Wendy Dorval about it, but I may have. But yes, that's what you do.
So if it's just a concern, like a suspicious person, you dial non-emergency, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if it's an actual crime occurring, you dial 911.
If those are the instructions, yes.
And which one did Mrs. Zimmerman dial?
The non-emergency.
Evidencing, would you agree that he was not concerned that a crime was actually occurring, just that he was concerned about somebody being where they may not supposed to be?
Yes, sir.
And in your experience and knowledge, did you think it was inappropriate for Mrs. Zimmerman to call non-emergency when he saw Trayvon Martin hanging out by between two homes in the rain, in the dark?
Objection as he calls for speculation on his part.
Sustained.
You want to ask him for his, okay. In your opinion, I don't want you to speculate as to what, but in your opinion, was that an appropriate from law enforcement experience, was that an appropriate occurrence for him to contact non-emergency based upon seeing somebody who he didn't know at night in the rain between two homes, not walking away, just standing there?
My objection is to assume that those facts are accurate and truthful.
The jury...
Okay, you can answer the question.
That would be reasonable to call
correct?
an emergency.
Matter of fact, if you were driving an unmarked car past that at that precise moment and saw Trayvon Martin there standing between two buildings at night in the rain, not moving, maybe even looking into a window, would you have stopped and talked to him?
Not just based on his presence. No, I would not.
And why not?
He might live there.
But the question is, would you stop and ask him?
Not just based on what you observed, no.
You agree that police, at least, are supposed to look into situations that might be suspicious?
If brought to the attention by a citizen, yes.
I'm sorry?
If brought to the attention by a citizen, such as George Zimmerman, yes, we are obligated to.
So you wouldn't do it on your own?
If on routine patrol, I can't say. Maybe.
Mr. Doliondra asked you that if you had found out whether or not Trayvon Martin was armed, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you also realize from the investigation, presuming for a moment that Mrs. Zimmerman's story is completely accurate, and that he did in fact receive the injuries to the back of his head at Trayvon Martin's hands, that Trayvon Martin was smashing his head, hitting his head against concrete, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you consider that to have armed himself with the concrete?
Yes, sir.
So, though he may not have been armed when he was walking, he certainly armed himself with something that could cause great bodily injury or death by hitting the head against concrete, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in the challenge interview, and I know we go back and forth as to whether or not it's an interview with challenge, an interview for information, but again, for these purposes, calling it a challenge interview. Mrs. Zimmerman stated to you that his concern was that there were people who are out there, quote, victimizing the neighborhood, right?
Yes, that's what he said, yes.
And do you believe that his basis for that thought or even that feeling was well-founded? Let me ask it this way. How many burglaries had occurred in that neighborhood in the past 4 or 5 months?
I don't have the exact numbers, sir.
Would you consider it to be a rash of burglaries?
It would depend how many we're talking about. I don't know.
Well, limiting to the extent of what you looked into. I know you looked into Emmanuel Burgess, and he was arrested a couple of weeks before. And
Yes,
there were
sir.
other burglaries that you were aware of, correct, within the last few months before this event?
I'd have to refresh my memory as far as the number, as to consider it a rash of burglaries. To consider it a rash of burglaries or a crime spree, but I guess in his mind, yes.
And, of course, burglaries are what occur when the people are not at home, correct?
Repeat, please.
A burglary that we're talking about now are those where the people are not at home when the crime occurs, correct?
Correct.
It's called burglary of an occupied dwelling or home invasion when somebody's home, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that happened here as well, didn't it?
Yes, sir.
A woman, and you were aware in your investigation that a woman and her, I think, 4-month-old child had to hide in a bedroom closet while 2 guys downstairs took out her TV, laptop, and other items.
Yes, sir.
And that was only weeks before February 26th of 2012, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it may have been months before, a couple of months before, if I said weeks.
It had occurred, though.
Concerning the videotaping, I can put you back to the tape. My memory, and tell me if I'm wrong, was that when you were bluffing Mr. Zimmerman about the idea that Trayvon Martin may have had a phone, that was videotaping things. You certainly did it in as believable a way as you could, remember?
Yes, sir.
You know how to get it across to him, correct?
Yes,
He
sir.
seemed smug, as though he already had made this decision. Well, you can try and bluff me if you want, but I know he didn't have his phone out. Was there any of that came across to you?
No, sir.
In this challenge interview, was that exactly what you were looking for to see?
Partially, yes.
And none of that came across to you, did it?
None at all. No.
Matter of fact, he seemed quite interested in the fact that there may have been a videotape, correct?
Yes, he did.
Didn't he also say that he, maybe without his knowing, he'd hoped that the homeowners association had put up another video camera somewhere in that back area?
Yes, he did.
So he actually said to you, not only do I hope that Trayvon Martin was somehow taping this, or since he had the phone out or whatever, that somehow maybe it was on video. And he said, what was his words? Thank God. I hope he was videotaping.
Words to those effect, yes.
He even said to you, well, maybe it's being videotaped from somewhere else. That maybe homeowners association had put up a camera going right down that dog walk that I wasn't aware of, or for that matter, any one of the dozen neighbors may have had a video camera out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Didn't he also indicate that he even hoped that maybe the one person who had come out, who we now know to be John Good, that maybe he had videotaped it?
I don't know if he verbalized that, but he seemed to be very open to having something videoed. Yes. He seemed to be very elated in the prospect that there was some sort of videotape.
Hoping that that would actually document what happened that night.
Yes, sir.
Another challenge that you did, just a moment for my another. Please, I didn't do a complete pirouette. And I said, excuse me first. Thank you. Another challenge that you did to Mr. Zimmerman was concerning this question about the hands over the face, correct? Because
Yes,
that was
sir.
a concern of yours, right?
Yes, sir.
As he had said, he placed his hand over my face at one point. I really thought he was suffocating me. Words like that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And yet, on the screaming of the 911, there wasn't a great deal of muffling. Would you agree?
No, sir, there was not, yes.
And had there been muffling, then it would have even been perfectly coordinated with what Mrs. Zimmerman told you, because then the suffocating muffling would have shown up on the tape. But in this case, it didn't, correct?
Correct.
You would agree that the screams are from one person, correct?
Based on interpreted, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that they were just that, screams, stop, scream, stop, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think you said that you also believed Mr. Zimmerman may have exaggerated as to the number of times getting hit, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Delarosa brought that up again as an exaggeration, right?
Possible, yes.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it as to how it might be perceived when you're the one getting hit, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. May also be that you perceive getting smothered even when somebody has your hand on their broken nose?
Possibly, yes.
Okay. May have actually had a hand on his mouth or nose, but just not enough to interfere with Mrs. Zimmerman's continued screams for help, correct?
Correct.
So even though you challenged him on that to try and come up with an answer, and he told you, I don't know, right?
Correct.
Did he change his story at that point, realizing that now you got him on a fact, and just say, well, actually I turned over and I was screaming the other way, and that's what? Did he do any of that?
No, sir, did not.
He just basically said, I think he had his hands on my head, right?
Yes, sir.
I think he was trying to stop me from
Yes, sir.
breathing. And it hurt.
Yes, sir.
And just so we're clear in that regard, would you agree that there may have been some screams muffled enough so that they simply didn't show up on the tape?
There could have been, possibly.
With that last challenge, this, you call it the suffocation challenge, was there anything in that challenge of Mrs. Zimmerman that you thought then was problematic? The way he answered it?
No, sir.
Now let's talk about the video where Mr. Zimmerman seems, maybe for the second time, to not notice Miss Lauer's number on the right-hand side, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as he's walking you through it, again, voluntarily doing what you wanted him to do, right?
Yes, sir.
He sort of looked over and he said, I didn't see anything here, correct?
Yes, sir.
And obviously, had he looked to his right, if he had been in that correct spot, and had he not been blocked by the tree that the jury has seen from another picture, then he might have seen or could have seen Miss Lauer's numbers, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would he have seen them if he had just started walking by and just got past Miss Lauer's, the front door right there? Is there any number on the side of that building?
No, sir.
Okay. So if I might carefully approach Your Honor then. Just so we're clear on, again, States 139. This is Miss Lauer's, and front door here. Number is sort of on this side.
Yes, sir. Facing the street.
Right, facing out this way.
Yes, sir.
So if Mr. Zimmerman had gotten to this point or was looking around, doing whatever he was doing, as soon as he got to somewhere in this point, he would not have a line of sight to those.
I'm going to object to misstating what Mr. Zimmerman said on video as to where he was when he didn't or did see the address.
Okay.
I'll clear that up.
Rephrase your question.
No one could see the numbers once you get past this, correct?
Correct.
And you do agree that Mr. Zimmerman was trying to do the best he could to acknowledge what he was doing in the recreation, correct?
By appearances, yes.
He seemed to be doing everything that he could to explain to you what he was doing?
Yes, sir.
As he was doing this, was it a situation where you just sort of letting him run with it, or were you asking him any questions along the way?
I believe some questions were asked for clarification.
Sure. And when he said, as he's walking with Miss Lauer's to the right of him, and he's sort of looking this way, the car is somewhere near where he said he parked his, right?
From what I recall, yes.
And you had the non-emergency call already known by the time you did the recreation, so you knew an idea of the series of events, correct?
Yes, sir.
You knew that he had said that I'd gotten out of the car about here, right?
Yes, sir.
And that he was walking down that road, or doing something, walking, running, jogging, whatever he was doing. He was ambulating down that pathway, correct?
Yes, sir.
That he sort of looked over and said, I couldn't see any numbers. And he looked to his left, correct?
From what I recall, yes.
Yeah. Did anyone ever think at that point to go, excuse me, you back up and look over this way, there's a number. Why didn't you look at that number?
If it wasn't mentioned, no.
Did you ever do that afterwards?
No.
Did that seem, in the context of what he was trying to explain that happened to him that night, that ended up with what it ended up with, that was some type of active deception to you?
I didn't interpret it as such, no.
Okay. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense in your mind that he couldn't remember the name of the street, correct?
Correct.
Like you said, there's only 3 there, correct?
Correct.
Did you, and you even questioned him about that, right?
Yes, sir.
But did that show to you to be some active deception on his part?
The fact that he could remember the 3 streets could have possibly, yes, it did raise flags and concerns.
Okay. And did that lead to any concern? I mean, you addressed it in this confrontation interview, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're okay with what he responded?
That's all I could do is be okay with it. And it's...
And then you were questioned about a number of things concerning the investigation. So I want to talk to you about some of those.
Okay.
The medical examiner's report. You had a chance to review that, correct?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And the medical examiner's report and its findings were consistent with Mrs. Zimmerman's story, were they not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As far as how he shot him, correct? Where he shot him?
Yes, sir.
And the distance between the muzzle of the gun.
Yes, sir.
Evidencing that though the muzzle of the gun was up against the chest, up against the shirt, that the shirt was not up against the chest, that there was a few inch difference.
Yes, sir.
Right? And didn't that support the contention that Mr. Martin was hanging over Mr. Zimmerman, his shirt coming forward when the shot was fired?
It did.
Right?
Yes.
Because had he been standing up, as I am now, the shirt would be up against the chest, probably. Right?
Probably, yes.
And if I lean over, my shirt is going to fall apart from my chest a few inches, and that seems to be how it was, correct?
Yes, sir.
The medical examiner's report, however, does not support a contention, an allegation, that Mr. Zimmerman pressed that gun against Trayvon Martin's chest before he fired it, does it?
Not from the one I
Matter
heard.
of fact, the known evidence completely contradicts that type of a suggestion, doesn't it?
From what I understand, yes.
So no pressing of the gun against the chest, was there?
Not based on evidence that I've read, no.
And you saw the 7-Eleven video since, right? Though I think Mr. De Leon just suggested you didn't have it then. You've certainly seen it since.
I don't think I viewed the video itself. I think that was bought after I was...
No, but have you seen it?
I've seen stills, still photos.
And the stills that you saw showed Trayvon Martin in it?
Yes, sir.
And show him the way he appeared that night?
Yes, sir.
So when you say that certainly in the autopsy photograph that you wanted to show Mr. Zimmerman, which again was part of the challenge interview, correct?
Yes, sir.
You hit him with something sort of emotional and to ground him that he had caused the death of this person?
It was graphic, yes, sir.
And that's the purpose of it, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But the picture of Mr. Martin at 7-Eleven, would you agree that shows somebody at his height, whatever that might have been, in the shoes and the hoodie, and wearing the outfit that he was wearing, that he did not look in the 7-Eleven video to be the skinny kid that you showed the picture of to Mrs. Zimmerman, correct?
Correct.
Much larger looking individual?
I would agree with you, yes.
Okay. My height or so? I'm
Correct.
6'2", right?
Yes.
If I was wearing a hoodie and had his shoes on, or a reach differential?
Yes, sir.
You know what that means, right?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
The reach is measured arm to arm, sideways.
Have a moment, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Let's start at the very end. Would you agree that after somebody dies, they don't get taller?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Have you ever heard of when people die that they get taller?
Oh, no, sir.
So you're not disputing if the medical examiner were to say they measured him on a table that died, he grew to be 6'2".
No,
Are
sir.
you?
No.
I mean, have you ever heard of that? Somebody dying and growing taller?
No, sir.
Okay. And by the way, Mr. O'Mara asked you, I want to make sure I understood your answer. Are you saying that in Seminole County it's against the law for somebody to wear a hoodie at night?
Objection, Your Honor. That is a mischaracterization of the evidence in my question.
Okay, I think you need to rephrase it because you started.
Are you saying that it's against the law for a person to wear a hoodie at night?
No, sir. No, sir, I'm not.
I believe in your investigation and your interview with the defendant that he had a phone, correct, that night? When he observed the victim, Trayvon Martin? The defendant had a cell phone,
yes,
right?
He did. Yes.
You didn't find any evidence that the defendant, when he's claiming he's seen the suspicious activity, videotaped or photographed the suspicious activity that he claims the victim was doing.
We object, Your Honor.
Was there any evidence of that?
Just a second. What's the objection?
Outside the scope of recross, unless we're opening up that new area.
No, overruled. It's not opening it up.
You were asked about videos, right? Was there any evidence to indicate that when the defendant claimed that the victim was committing a crime or was about to commit a crime, that he videotaped it since he had a phone with the ability to videotape or take photographs? Did he ever do that?
No, sir.
You were asked about this item that was found behind some bushes. Isn't it true that was part of an awning that Mr. Manalo had there?
It was part of his house, yeah.
Right. There was no evidence to indicate that was used as a tool or a Slim Jim or anything like that?
None whatsoever.
And you would agree that an expert, or if he's qualified as an expert, a medical examiner or assistant medical examiner would be better qualified as to the findings that he made versus you saying what he said?
Yes, sir.
You would defer to a medical examiner, would you not?
Absolutely.
Mr. O'Mara asked you some questions about the burglaries that were being committed out there at Retreat Twin Lakes that you investigated or determined there was some, right?
Yes, sir.
And that the defendant had made calls about them, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think Mr. O'Mara referred to it as a black male, right? At least one of them he referred to. Did you know whether the other individuals he had called on were black males or not?
From what I recall researching, yes. From what I recall researching then, yes, they were.
Mr. O'Mara asked you a bunch of questions about the word, pardon my language, asshole. And did I understand you correctly to say that that is a derogatory term in describing somebody, or referring to somebody?
In my opinion, yes.
And Mr. O'Mara asked you about the words that the defendant uttered on February 26th at around 7:10 before he followed the victim. Do you recall him specifically under his breath saying, pardon my language, these fucking punks? Do you recall that's the way he uttered it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you read any comics?
Never what?
Do you read any comics?
Comics.
Comics? No?
No.
Now they have a little caption where they have like a little bubble because they kind of, what the person's thinking?
Yes, sir.
Okay. At the time he got out of the car and was getting out of the car, defendant said the words, these fucking punks, pardon my language, right?
Yes, sir.
And then he followed Trayvon Martin, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. O'Mara asked you a few questions about suffocating. Do you recall being asked questions about that, suffocating?
Yes, sir.
Now, the defendant claims that the victim was suffocating him, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you find any evidence of blood on the victim's hands?
None that I'm aware of. No, sir.
And there was evidence that the defendant was bleeding, especially on his mouth, right here on his mustache. He had some, right under his nose, he had some blood, correct?
Yes, sir.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? I'm not going to hit you, but...
You can hit me. That's
if I can. And I'm hitting you, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the defendant's claiming, that I'm suffocating you and I'm not going to put my hand in your mouth.
That's fine.
Would you have your hands like that, just like this? Or would you be fighting me?
I'd be fighting you. I would fighting you. Make sure you got that.
Did you find any blood or anything on the defendant's hands?
No, sir.
You were also asked about the witnesses and stuff. And body of personal witness again. State Exhibit 140. Mr. O'Mara showed you this. You recall this? And he asked you in terms of assuming that, and I apologize, he may have actually shown you 139. I apologize. Let me take those up so that. 139, he asked you about assuming the defendant's story is correct in terms of where the altercation had, etc.
Yes, sir.
Did you have some evidence that possibly there was something going on behind these houses here, the Bajador's house?
Yes, sir.
You were asked about the hoodie at the 7-Eleven. I'm not aware of, but what law states that an individual can't go into a 7-Eleven with a hoodie? Is there some law that I missed?
No, sir.
I have no. And finally, you did not have the phone records in terms of Trayvon Martin or Rachel Gentell's, right, the lady you did not know he was talking to determine whether it was accurate based on when the defendant's phone finished or not.
No, sir, I did not.
In other words, you didn't have the defendant's phone records either, did you?
No, sir.
And I'm talking about in the February 29th interview. I apologize.
I was assuming that, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. You know, we've been here almost 2 hours this morning on cross, redirect, recross, redirect, and now you're seeking to recross. I will give you 5 minutes. It's the state's witness, and the state will then have another 5 minutes on redirect.
Sorry, there's just new areas going into it. I have to address them.
Well, you have 5 minutes.
I will take it.
For your recross.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, as far as any blood on Mr. Zimmerman's hands, of course, when he got to you, he was already cleaned up by EMTs and he had washed himself at SPD, correct?
Yes, sir.
You wouldn't expect to find blood on his hands at that point, would you?
No, sir.
Okay. And when the suggestion is, why didn't Trayvon Martin have blood on his hands, is blood susceptible to gravity as well? Like
yes, sir, it is.
So if he gets smashed in the nose and is thrown on the ground, which way is the blood going?
Towards the ground.
And back down his throat?
Back down his throat. Or
right. And only when he stands up is it going to start coming out of his nostrils?
Yes, sir.
Which is after he's no longer being mounted by Trayvon Martin?
Typically, yes, sir.
Okay. So break my nose, put me on the ground, my blood's going backwards into my throat, right?
Theoretically, yes.
And would not be available to be on Trayvon Martin's hands at that point because there was no blood outside the nose, correct?
Correct.
And I'm not going to approach you like he did, but basically, first of all, let's use the left. If he's holding him down, could that be literally momentary that he's holding him down and that Mrs. Zimmerman is trying to get back up?
Yes, sir.
And could the attempt to suffocate literally be momentary as well?
Yes, sir.
Could it even be a sleeve or an arm or a palm or anything that could have given Mrs. Zimmerman that impression?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. You have.
I think I'm only going to ask 2 or 3 questions.
Thank you.
I may only ask one. Right now, it could be raining outside, right?
Yes, sir.
And that would be pure speculation on your part, would it not?
Yes, it would.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Officer Serino, you're excused from the courtroom, but you're subject to being recalled. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll take a 15-minute recess. If you'll please put your notepads face down on the chairs and follow Deputy back into the jury room.
As they walk out, you didn't release it until Thank you. Sorry. You said
Please be seated, and I did tell him it was subject to being recalled. Is there anything we need to take up before we recess for 15 minutes?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
I have a motion I'm filing at this point, Your Honor. It certainly doesn't need to be addressed right this minute.
Okay.
But it's in response to a motion the state filed yesterday. I don't know if they've noticed it for hearing or not.
I haven't received any notices for hearing, but we'll go ahead and take your motion. We'll be in recess.